Welcome back to the Azure AD Architecture Deep Dive series. So far, we've covered cloud authentication with PHS and PTA. Now we should cover the federation to complete this part of the series.
So now let's say that we have now Alice here, and she wants to go to check her email in Exchange, and she's using Outlook with modern authentication, of course. And now when she opens Outlook, she will see a pop-up window, and that's pretty much a browser for our purposes today. In that case, Exchange Online will say, I don't know who you are, go to Azure AD, and we will redirect the user to Azure AD. Azure AD then needs to know first how to authenticate Alice, so it renders a login page so she can type in the username, which we call in identity the user principal name or UPN. So that's step number one here. This is where this diagram starts. Azure AD has a lot of services under the covers, and we're seeing here the authentication services, which is the system that implements the different authentication protocols and the user experiences for credential gathering and validation. Since we are using federation, those experiences are not going to be used, but this is the same component. Now, the left side here, we have on-premises identity provider infrastructure. We also call it IDP, and that can be ADFS or any other federation product that implements SAML or WS federation protocols.
It is important to note here that the identity provider is in the critical path and is also receiving traffic from public internet. How should we advise our customers to run this infrastructure at scale?
Right. As any other piece of critical infrastructure, that needs to be monitored, patched, and highly available. This means that we have to have some sort of load balancing in the infrastructure. And federation services also rely quite a bit on certificates that they need to be rolled out periodically for token encryption, token signing, etc., etc. As you point out, it requires to reach back both to on-premises directory over here, but also needs to be available for requests coming from the public internet. For example, in ADFS, that requires deploying both a federation service server inside the corporate network and a web application proxy server in the DMZ. It's definitely a significant investment in infrastructure. I only mentioned like service, server, but there are multiple servers to make it highly reliable and rock solid for a deployment in production.
That sounds great. Let's look at the flow.
All right. So Alice types the UPN here and submits the form to Azure AD. Let's say her UPN is alice@wingtiptoys.com. Azure AD needs to discover what tenant she belongs to and the configuration. The authentication service then, with the user principal name that she typed in, queries the core store. And the core store will return an answer saying that she needs to use federation. And this is, again, determined by the domain configuration. In this scenario is wingtiptoys.com. As part of the request to the core store, the authentication service also retrieves the URL of the identity provider. The federation protocol that should be used can be either SAML or WS federation, and the token signing certificates to validate the federated token that it will be received at the end. The Azure AD authentication service then redirects the user to the identity provider in step 3, and the federation system takes over the interaction from that point onwards in step 4. Like the previous flows, the interaction is always requiring some sort of credential gathering, here in step 5, and credential validation, step 6. And finally, an authentication token is issued to the user in step number 7. In password hash sync, we happen to use the hashes in the cloud, and in PTA, we use agents, but the fundamental steps of gathering a credential and validating that credentials won't change. On step 8 here, Azure Active Directory receives the token from the identity provider and validates a few things in step 9. The token should be signed with the certificates that Azure AD knows ahead of time per the domain configuration. Second, it should also have an Azure AD, should have the audience marked as Azure AD. And third, the name identifier of the SAML assertion should match the immutable ID of Alice that is also stored in the core store. So if those things are successful, then the authentication is successful. The authentication service also remembers pieces of data based on the claims in the token, in this case, the SAML assertion token. We need to remember the authentication methods. So for example, if Alice used multi-factor authentication on premises, then Azure AD will remember that she did it so that if there's a policy later or an application that requires MFA, then the policy will be satisfied without prompting the user again. Similarly, we have another claim called inside corporate network, same thing. This will help with conditional access policies that require the request coming from a trusted location.
This is super helpful, Ramiro. This wraps up our mini-series on hybrid authentication methods. Now that we've seen all the methods on how to authenticate, I want to summarize a few points. The original AD hashes never leave on-prem. We send a hash of the hash to the cloud with PHS. PHS authentication has the least latency because it is a geo-load balanced by Azure AD. PHS is also resilient to on-prem outages because it all happens in the cloud. PHS also enables customers to discover leaked credentials compromised in the public or dark web. Customers can enable PHS and keep federation. PTA does not require you to synchronize the hashes, but we really encourage customers to turn it on. With PTA, the on-prem agents are in the critical authentication path. For federated customers, all the servers in the federation infrastructure are in the critical path. Customers can gradually migrate from federation to either PHS or PTA using stage rollout. And finally, I want to leave you with this decision tree that can help you to find out what method works best for you. You can find it if you follow the link here. We hope you found these videos useful. We'll be adding videos on different topics like more authentication scenarios, provisioning, governance, and many, many more. If you want to get a copy of the diagrams we used today or want to give us feedback and help us figure out what to cover in the future, please follow the link on the screen.